This topic explores the idea of one's memory controlling their identity. Every single human living on the earth has created an identity for themselves. Some believe they were born into a certain identity, while others use their life experiences to guide them and shape them. But if one does not possess a memory, this could potentially affect their day-to-day behavior and significant aspects of their overall lives. So we must ask ourselves, does the possession of memory define us? The article discusses the notion of identity and memory, entertaining the idea that without the memories of one's life, they may lose their identity as well. This can be very literal in the case of amnesia, false memory syndrome, and Alzheimer's disease. The TOK knowledge issues that I'll be focusing in on in this presentation is: what is identity? Is it something you're born with, or do your experiences create your identity? If you lose your memory, do you lose your identity? In the case of false memories or diluted thinking, if a memory did not actually happen, does the memory become part of their identity? Or in other words, is false memory part of one's identity? And how do we know if memories are reliable? The first knowledge issue that I'll be addressing is what is identity? As far as the definition of identity goes, I believe it's a very multifaceted idea. On one hand, we're born into a certain position in this world. Out of all of the millions of people in the millions of places, your parents found each other at the exact same time and place, in the exact same space. Despite all of the odds that were against your birth, you were born into this world rather than someone else. So in a sense, where you came from is greatly a part of your identity. The culture you are from, whether you grew up in it or not, will forever be a large part of your life. A Russian psychologist named Vygotsky proposed a theory about child development, which focused on the importance of social interaction, culture, and the language in a child's life. These three characteristics will greatly determine how the child develops. This can be looked at in two ways. On one hand, you could argue that the predestined culture of the child will influence them, basically supporting the idea that you were born into your identity. Or you can look at it in the societal point of view, in the way that the experiences that the child grows up with in a particular society is responsible for the identity that they associate themselves with. For me personally, I believe it's a combination of both that both varies between the individual. I believe that some people feel a very strong connection to the culture they came from, while others affiliate themselves with hobbies, a certain group of friends, a career, or a talent. Culture, experiences, and the uniqueness of the self come together to create what we know as the identity. The next issue that we'll be discussing is, if you lose your memory, do you lose your identity? I don't believe that if you lose your memory, you can completely lose your identity. While without memory, things that once defined you are no longer there, the person is still there. In the concept of mentality being reality, I suppose that one would lose a part of themselves with their memory. But this doesn't change the fact that what happened has happened. It may change the circumstances of the person in the present time, but it doesn't alter what was. For example, if a man was a carpenter for his entire life and lost his memory of being one, this does not change the fact that he actually was. Though his memory is gone, the callous patches of skin would remain on his hands, the many homes that he built would still stand, and the many people he helped would still appreciate him. The only difference between the man then and the man now is that the experiences of loss of memory will now be an experience added to his identity. In the case of false memory syndrome, there are people whose minds have been conjured up memories that didn't actually happen. These memories could have been a part of a dream or perhaps a vision that has been replayed in their head. FMS could have been brought on by trauma, abuse, or some kind of mental illness or physical accident. I believe that these false memories do not take away from reality, but rather add on another unit of complexity to the person's identity. For if they fully believe something happened without a doubt in their mind, this belief will influence them possibly for the rest of their life. And although the actual memory will not have been real, the consequences because of such very much will be. And so, FMS itself, as well as the domino effect caused by it, will become another event that will influence a person's memory and thus identity. Memory, as much as we'd like to think, is actually not reliable at all. Many psychological studies show that memories can be very easily skewed by bias, predetermined personal beliefs, heavy emotion, distractions, stereotypes, input from others, and an overall massive lack of consistency. Because of this, eyewitnesses participating in the justice system are very unreliable and can often convict the wrong person. In the 1990s, an organization called the Innocence Project was founded in the United States. This program provided assistance to wrongly convicted people to overturn their convictions based on DNA evidence. By the end of 2008, there was over 220 individuals that were proven innocent. Most often, when questioned about memory in a stressful situation, people will make mistakes when recounting what had happened. So at the end of the day, memory is not reliable at all. In this case of identity, this could mean that not all of our memories that define us are completely accurate, but this does not mean that they are completely wrong either. For example, if a college football player scores the winning point for his game, he may remember the play to be much more majestic and impressive than it actually was, giving the credit to himself rather than perhaps a stroke of luck. In this case, memory is not completely changed, but simply altered to accommodate the person's wishes. Personally, I've created my own identity based off of a combination of culture and experiences as well. I was born into a middle-class family of Hapa descent, for which those of you who do not know is a half-white or half-Asian. I was exposed by my mother and father to a copious amount of Asian, Western, and Hawaiian culture, which I feel greatly influenced my life. Because of my exposure to Asian culture, sushi is now one of my favorite foods. In addition, I took up learning Japanese to be closer to my culture so I would be able to communicate with my grandmother. Due to my Western culture, I made the decision to go to a private, predominantly white high school to receive a more typical Western education, so I would be more prepared to go to college in the mainland. And living in Hawaii, I've not only incorporated tropical activities into my life, but I've also embraced and learned to appreciate the aloha spirit, which is a philosophy taught to small children in Hawaii, basically living life of kindness, gentleness, and acceptance. But in addition to my cultural background, my identity was much decided on by my own through various hobbies and experiences. From a young age, I was interested in travel, and so I participated in many school clubs that allowed me to take trips around the world. In addition, I found that I was fascinated with music, so I took up playing several instruments and joined the school choir. These traits were not determined by where I was born or what family I was born into, but rather were initiated by myself. And because of my interest in these areas, I've gained many experiences that have encouraged me to further pursue these hobbies and have shaped me into the person that I am today. This topic relates to several other ways of knowing and areas of knowledge. The first is human emotion in the human sciences. By this I mean, memories are often altered by emotion, and therefore are not reliable, which was proven in the psychological studies previously discussed. The second is reasoning in history. We often base our identities off the reasoning of memories. For example, if one remembers their parents left them at a young age, and they recall the emotions of vulnerability, sadness, or anger, that person will often reason that their parents didn't love them. This is a notion that will forever impact their identity. And lastly, perception in history. There are millions of ways of perceiving the same situation. The perception received by an individual is strongly based off of their predisposition of the occurrence. This perception will add either positive or negative connotations to the memory that will be stored. For example, say a teenager, you see an adult walk by covered in tattoos. If this adult appears confident and social, you will come up with a positive perception that will imprint into your mind, which may later influence your decisions in your own life, shaping your own identity. Now I'm going to address the various counterclaims that would be made to my points. So some would argue that without memory, one completely loses themselves. For example, I found an article about a man named Jeffrey who lived in Denver. He suffered from a case of amnesia while driving up to Canada to see a friend. He could not remember his past life or what had happened. When reunited with his wife, he did not recognize her face. Although relieved to be reunited with her husband, the wife, whose name is Penny Hansen, would fundamentally be living with a stranger. Jeffrey did not know who he was or where he was. There's no guarantee that he would possess any of the interests or skills that he did before. Although he was in the same body, he would not be the same person. His mother explained to NBC News that her son had experienced amnesia episodes in the past and has never fully recovered from the memories that he lost. His doctors have said that people with this condition will take on either partial or completely new identities once the amnesia has hit them. Although Jeffrey is back with his family in his own body, the loved ones of Jeffrey would argue that they have lost him to the amnesia, and without his memories, he is not there. Although in Jeffrey Ingram's case, his family feels that they have lost him, I believe that the identity of the self is much different than the identity perceived by other people. And while Jeffrey may not remember the familiar faces now, he still has some basis of personality that he did before. In a later interview with NBC News, he told them that even though his wife's face wasn't familiar to him, her heart was, and even though he could not remember his home, it felt like home to him. This proves that even though one may lack memory of some sort, their basic core being remains the same, and thus their identity remains overall untouched. Although we define ourselves in so many different ways, it's comforting to know that no matter what you go through, you will always be you.
Created using Powtoon.